Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. This week we're going to be focusing on dual engine failure on board an airliner. We're going to keep it general, yet we're going to go into several chapters. First one is going to be why could you lose both engines on a dual engine aircraft airliner. Second one is going to be the reaction. What is the crew going to do? How are they going to react to that sudden loss of power? Number three is going to be, did it ever happen? And we're going to have a look at 4 examples, yet there are plenty more. And number 4 is going to be looking at across the Atlantic. And across the Atlantic, we're going to be talking about ETOPS, the tracks, SAR, search and rescue, and landing close to ships. So, if you don't know me, I'm Ate, I'm French-Canadian. I've been in the service for the French Navy flying jets for 13 years, joined a major airline in North America flying the 737 MAX, not doing much flying lately. I'm now a keynote speaker, author with a best-selling Debrief. That's my book, got the link below. And I also do some coaching, stuff like that, webinars, corporate training, all that good stuff. But today I'm going to put my safety and airline pilot hat. I've got my US airline transport license, Canadian airline transport license, and EASA, so European CPL IR ME MCC. So, jingle.
Check. Radar. Secure. Gun blast diffuser. Clear. Right intake. Check. Left intake. Check. Detection seat is safe. Arm handle. Copy, I shall say. Move. Com, IFF. Up and up. Let's go. Move it. TDI, MPCD, and HCP. Go flight. FCS, ECS, AWP. It's all green across the board. Okay for start. Copy, okay for start.
As you have seen today in the background, you're going to see Flight Simulator 2020. Put myself in the A320 Neo aircraft across the Atlantic, and at 37,000 feet I decided to turn the engine off and prove you how well of a glider modern airliners are, and they do glide extremely well. But let's get right into it, and let's start with chapter 1. Why would you be in an aircraft that suddenly loses its engines like this? Well, several reasons. First, let's have a look at the engines. The engines are extremely safe, so don't worry, it doesn't happen every day. So the engines are extremely reliable. But let's say you have an oil issue, a big maintenance oil issue, for example, then you might lose 100, maybe 2 engines at the same time. If you have fire, if the engine take fire, you might lose 1, and if it's really the worst day ever, you might have dual engine fire, and you're going to have to cut your engine off. Then you can have an issue with maintenance inside, maybe a broken piece, stuff like that. So that will maybe lose into the loss of 1 engine, losing 2 engines, very unlikely. And maybe you haven't heard about it, but nowadays engines just like this one, it uses messages and it sends maintenance information toward the manufacturer, toward the company, toward a lot of stuff. Let's say roll walls, they use what we call flight messenger, and the engine auto-analyze itself and ship information to maintenance so that you know which pieces you should change when you land, and maintenance is extremely well designed now. You can also have a technical issue of any sort, like broken piece, all that stuff, but again, extremely unlikely. And we're going to be talking about what can make you fly away from airfield in the ETOPS category in a couple minutes, and you're going to see how reliable those engines are. But now let's look at the aircraft. From my aircraft toward the engine, what could go wrong that forced me to lose my engines? First one is going to be the fuel. Let's say your fuel is contaminated, or worse, you run out of fuel. No fuel, no engine. That's it. And the example we're going to see, sometimes they had no fuel, so no fuel, no engines. And then you could have an issue between the aircraft and the engine. Maybe something is leaking, stuff like that. The fuel you have in your fuel tanks do not go to the engine, and you're going to lose your engines or both engines. You can have an issue in terms of software as well, or it could be something you did yourself. Like I just turned off the engine in this aircraft. If you turn off the engine, guess what? It's going to glide. And where I'm getting is, how could you end up in a glider by turning off the wrong engine? What does that mean? Imagine you take off, you have issues on one engine, and you turn off not the engine that you want to turn off, but you turn off the good remaining engine. It happened before in Asia, it happened before in aviation. That's why you have to be extremely careful when you turn an engine off. You want to make sure you're turning off the engine that has an issue that you want to turn off and not the other ones. That's why we cross-check each other. But in aviation, it happened before. Takeoff, let's say, left engine fire, the guy shut down the engine right. Dual engine failure, glider. Not ideal. Now, we talk about engine issues, we talk about issues from the plane. Let's now look at the outside world. How can the outside world impact my jet? Well, first one, of course, is in case of shock. We've seen in Asia a couple of weeks ago that if you don't put your gear down and you tap on the runway, it's gonna damage your engines and it's gonna lead to a dual engine failure. So first one is gonna be a catastrophic pressure on the engines from the outside. Let's say the runway. Second one is birds. Not just one bird, but because the engine are tested with chicken and all that stuff, but a lot of birds, flocks of birds, and just like for Sully, we'll talk about it, too many birds and then the engine just breaks down. That's coming from the outside. And another one, maybe you haven't heard about it, is volcanic ash. So a 747 actually flew once in volcanic ash, in volcanic ashes, and he lost all engines and he was able to restart his engines later. But flying into bad air would lead to engine failure. That's why you have to be extremely careful with that. And of course, surprises, because aviation is all about surprises and stuff you haven't anticipated. And the A350 made the headlines for getting one engine shut down by coffee. Yeah, coffee was spilled on the cockpit of a 350 from Delta Airlines flying to Seoul, and they had to divert to Fairbanks because 15 minutes after, one of the engines automatically shut down. And a couple of months later, a 350 again, they spilled tea. Yeah, different culture, but coffee, tea this time. And for the tea, it takes a little more time. It took an hour for the engine to shut down and they couldn't restart it. So if it's a matter of interest to you, you can Google it. I'm not going to be covering all that, but maybe one day I'll make a video about it because it's sort of impressive technology. Okay, so we talked about the why. Now let's have a look at the reaction. I'm flying my aircraft and let's say fuel leak. I ran out of fuel. What am I going to do? So as a pilot, airline pilot, I'll have SOPs, standard operating procedures, that are going to covering what should we do as a crew in a case like that. And the manufacturer and the company gives us checklist as well. How should we react? Hey, I've got an engine failure, how should I react? And you usually have several pieces of information. You see me turning on the APU, it's usually something you want to do, and I'll cover it in just a minute. But you're going to have different procedures depending on if you have an engine failure at low altitude, high altitude, medium altitude, and it's going to usually lead toward a windmill restart or a real complete restart. So you either use a windmill effect to restart the engine, or you're going to use the APU and do a restart like you would start the engine on the ground. Different aircraft, different procedures. It's not really the topic, but just so that you know, there are several ways of restarting an engine. Also, if you're extremely high, let's say 35,000 feet, you're probably not going to be able to restart the engine, or you're not going to try. Why? Because there is less air and you're going to be descending, gliding towards lower altitude, about 20,000 feet or below, before restarting the engine to improve your chances. So in the meantime, you're going to glide. Okay, so as a pilot in command, first, what you're going to do is aviate. I'm sure you've heard about aviate, navigate, communicate. It's one of the structure of my book, but aviate, navigate, communicate is key. First, you want to fly the aircraft. In an Airbus, what you're going to be doing is taking what we call green dots, so the best gliding speed. The computer is going to tell you you should fly at that speed. And you're going to be flying at that speed. It's going to give you the best glide speed. And for every single mile of altitude you have, it's going to give you the best numbers of miles in distance. So let's say you're flying 1 mile high, so that's 1 mile. And now you've got a 747. A 747 officially is 17.7 of gliding ratio. So if it's 1 kilometer high, it's going to be able to glide in a perfect world 17.7 kilometers like this, which is insane. It's a glider. It glides extremely well. And look, my aircraft has been gliding all the way for like 10 minutes now. If you have a 380, it's about 20. If you have a Cessna, it's about 10. It depends. If you have a delta wing jet, it's not going to be much. But to keep it simple, you can easily say that an airliner that is at 10 kilometers is going to be able to do about 150 kilometers, or let's say 100 miles-ish, okay? So it's pretty good glide ratio. It's going to be able to fly more than 20 minutes because it's going to take some time to cover that distance. And during that time, you're going to be flying green dot, make sure speed is okay, then you're going to navigate. So if you're on tracks, if you're in the airways, there are plenty of aircraft around you, so you don't want to run into them. So you're going to probably declare an emergency, say mayday, 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 and then you have procedures to exit those routes. Just imagine you're driving your car on the road, and suddenly you're on the left line or middle line and you have an engine failure. Same stuff, you can't just go on the right or on the left. You have to make sure you're not colliding with other traffic. So we have procedures for that. So you're going to navigate your way away from the traffic, and then you're going to be able to glide toward where you want to go. Safety airport, if there is one, a diversion airport, or water, and we'll talk about the water later. After that, you're going to communicate. So communicate is declaring an emergency, and it's going to be with ATC, air traffic control, but also with the personnel in the back and the passengers. You have to keep them up to date, and you have to explain to them what they should prepare for. So communication is inside the cockpit, outside the cockpit with ATC, and with the cabin crew, because, hey, you're in charge of the safety of all those passengers, and it has to be taken into account. So aviate, navigate, communicate. To be able to aviate efficiently, what do you need? You need electrical power and you need hydraulic power. Depending on the type of aircraft you're flying, modern aircraft, you're fly by wires. You need computers to fly the aircraft. You need electric power, you need hydraulic power. Therefore, we have what we call a RAT, a ram air turbine. It's a small propeller that exits the fuselage of the aircraft, and it's going to spin and it's going to give you electricity to enable you to fly the aircraft. However, be extremely careful, because as you're slowing down to ditch, for example, or to land, you're going to be traveling not as fast, and you're going to be losing some electrical power as well. So a lot of stuff to take into account. And as you've seen me done, you can also put on the APUs. That's an external source of power. It's a small engine in the back of the aircraft that's going to enable you to have your computers running. Okay, why? How do we react? Follow the procedures, aviate, navigate, communicate. We know we have some time. We're going to try to descend toward less than 20,000 feet to restart the engine. If we can't, we're going to glide our way down, and we're going to try to find a place to land. So did it happen before? Yes. And I'm going to keep it extremely fair, okay? No Boeing or Airbus hate here. It's not the topic at all. I'm Boeing qualified. My dad was Airbus qualified. I love all the aircraft. I'm not going to defend one or the other. But I'm going to start with a Boeing, Air Canada, 767 Glimmy glider. Back in 1983, they made a mistake between refueling in pounds and tons, and they had fuel gauge issue leading to running out of fuel, and they ended up gliding the aircraft and landing on a former base. Everybody survived. They flew the aircraft perfectly, and nobody was harmed in the aircraft. So that's in 83, gliding distance in Canada, and they all survived. 767. 737 Taka Air, flight 110, they were flying, and as you can see, that's why I've put some thunderstorms. They were approaching New Orleans, and they flew into a big sail. They didn't detect it initially, and due to pouring rain, they had dual engine flameout. Dual engine flameout due to rain, and then they had hail that destroyed the engines, and they ended up gliding. So they went to ditch on the canal, but they saw terrain and they lowered the gear, landing on the terrain, and they did such a great job, the aircraft was able to take off again and fly again. So 737, old school, they were able to perfectly glide it, land it, and everybody survived as well. And that's a great story. And now we're back in 2001 with Air Transat, those Canadians again. Air Transat is a Canadian leisure airline, and an A330 flying across the Atlantic towards Europe. And 2001 had a fuel leak, and they didn't initially detect the fuel leak for lots of reasons, and they started pumping fuel from the good side to the leaking side, ended up in a fuel complete, they ran out of fuel, and they ended up gliding more than 20 minutes and landing on islands, saving everyone on board. So the captain recently retired, so quite an ace and quite somebody important. So you can look this one up. It's an Air Transat flight that glided in 2001 with Captain Pichet. And then the one that everybody knows, 2009 A320 Sully, taking off from New York. Flock of Canadian goose, those Canadians again. Kidding, okay? Canadian goose have nothing to do with Canada, okay? It's not. Okay. And both engines got destroyed, ended up gliding at 2,800 feet-ish, and they ditched on the Hudson again. Everybody survived. So I just gave you 4 examples of complete dual engine failure on twin engine aircraft, and everybody survived. So you see, my aircraft is still flying, even India Mike, as we say, in the clouds. So now let's get a bit more technical and look at crossing the Atlantic. So back in the days, to cross the Atlantic, you needed 4 engines. And then they created ETOPS. So ETOPS, what does it mean? Something complex. It's definition of ETOPS is somewhere on my papers, but I lost it right now. Damn. There you go. ETOPS, extending range, twin engine operation performance standards. There you go. So it means that you're allowed to fly at more than 1 hour from a safety airfield. And you have several rules of ETOPS, and each of those rules have different constraints. So you can be allowed to do ETOPS 90. You can go up to 90 minutes from a diversion airfield on one engine. Okay, so that's a big trick. You're losing on one engine, you'll have to descend, because you won't be able to set 35,000 feet with only one engine. So you'll descend around maybe 20,000 feet, you'll have to reduce your speed, and you have to be able to fly during 90 minutes on one engine to the diversion airfield. That's ETOPS 90. You have ETOPS 120, that's 2 hours like that. ETOPS 180, that's 3 hours, and more than 80, that's basically ETOPS 240. And to be able to qualify for those, you have to go through a very strict process. And the process involves 2 pieces. First piece is the airframe and the engine. So you have to have your type, your aircraft qualified for it. And it's not just a type of fleet, it's a single aircraft. Every single aircraft has to be ETOPS qualified. And if you look on the nose wheel, you usually see ETOPS when it's an ETOP aircraft. So to be able to do that, the aircraft has to go through test with 100 loss. It has to prove that the engines are very reliable. It has to have special maintenance. It has to have special procedures. That's why also the operator, like the company, has to be ETOPS operator and qualified with special qualification for the pilots. I got my ETOPS grading in Canada. And for the maintenance personnel. Just a quick fun fact. Let's say you're landing in Toronto, you have to fly back doing ETOPS toward Europe, and you have to do maintenance controls or maintenance operations on both of your, let's say, 787 engines. The same technician is not allowed to operate on the left and on the right engine. That's ETOPS. Why? Because let's say the technician makes a mistake doing what he has to do on the left one, you don't want him to do the same mistake on the right engine. So those details are lessons learned from accidents we had in the past. And like Commander Pichet flight, the air transit flight, was due to a maintenance operation issue. So that's why you want to mitigate those risks. So everything is taken into account. And just to give you an idea, to be able to be ETOPS qualified on sub 180 minutes, you have to prove that the in-flight shutdown rate of your engine is better than, or less if you mean, but 1 by 100,000 hours. So basically your engines have to be extremely reliable. Okay, so now that you're ETOPS qualified, you're allowed to cross the Atlantic and be further away than 1 hour from a diversion airfield. So if you're more than 1 hour away, as you might guess, you're never going to be able to glide to an airfield. You're going to have to ditch. How do you cross the Atlantic? To cross the Atlantic, you have to follow what we call the tracks. The NAT-OTS, North Atlantic Tracks Organized Tracking System. So it's like routes above the ocean that are gonna separate everyone because there isn't a very good radar coverage. It's between flight level 290 and 410, and they change twice a day. They take into account the wind, all that good stuff, and their routes everybody follows, and you join the route, follow the route, and everybody's lined up like that. Concorde wasn't using them because he was flying above, and because he was flying so high, he had always the same route. Weather wasn't really an impact for him. That's just for your culture. So as you're flying those tracks, if you have an engine failure, there is a specific procedure to exit the tracks to make sure you're not running into your buddies. And now that you exited the tracks, that you have your dual engine failure, what are you going to do? Where are you going? Are you going to continue 4 hours toward Canada? Where are you going? And that's where you have to take into account the SAR, search and rescue efforts. Let's say you're continuing toward Canada forever and you're going to end yourself in the middle of nowhere, and it's going to be extremely tough for safety efforts for rescue personnel to get you. Or you can maybe turn toward Greenland, places like that, and put yourself closer from an airfield where the safety coordinate efforts are going to be able to work from. And you put yourself inside the SAR range of helicopters, and now you can save people. So those are stuff you have to take into account when you have an engine failure above the ocean like that. You want to glide yourself closer to places where the SAR, search and rescue personnel, helicopters, planes are going to be able to assist you. That's an important topic. Another one that's like extra cadeau, as we say in French, is nowadays we all fly with iPads, and those iPads, you have flight radar, you have the same system for ships. And if you were, personally, I put those up, and it enables me to track where the boats are. So if you run out of option, you might be getting closer to a SAR area, but hey, I'm gonna glide my aircraft toward the Queen Mary 2 or any cruise boat or any boat to ditch close to a boat that's going to be able to assist my personnel, assist my passengers, and save life as we're ditching at maybe 1 a.m. or even in the afternoon in the cold water. So those are stuff you can take into account, and as an airline pilot, those are stuff you should keep in mind because you're always ahead of the aircraft. And even though it hasn't happened yet, dual engine failure above the Atlantic, keeping in mind SAR rings, as we say, boat's position is going to enable pilots to save more passengers in the future. And that's what the fighter pilot and airline pilot mindset is all about, is putting your brain at work into anticipating scenarios that have never happened before, because if it happened one day, you don't have a choice, you have to make it work. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. We talked about why you could have a dual engine failure. We talk about following the SOPs, how you can relight the engines. We talk about stories that happened before, and a little bit about crossing the Atlantic. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any question, let me know in the comment section. The French version is going to come out in a couple of days on Sunday, 14:45. And fly safe. If you want to have a look at ate.teachable, I'll put the link below. It's a link where I share some preparation if you want to do interviews, stuff like that, join the military, or I do coaching, all that good stuff, or I teach how to fly and win dogfights in DCS. Fly safe, enjoy your week. Thanks for being here.